Hello, it's Kirby Summers, and I welcome you to my true crime podcast. Today is September the 2nd. Imagine that we're already in September. And this is a sort of a rant, if you will. Meanwhile, I want to thank those of you who are new to my channel. And I want to thank those of you who have been with me for a very long time and who take the time to like the podcast. So do me a favor, give it a like because it does help the algorithm. So I don't know how many of you are aware that I have been working on what is now a very long series on Leslie Wexner. And what continues to surprise me, as it should you, is the lack of real coverage on Wexner. What should also surprise you, as it surprises me, is the fact that, and I'm going to use Professor Hamamoto's word, how the pop-up pundits have basically provided to the public what I call low-lying fruit. Low-lying fruit meaning versions of the stories mainstream media have put together, or the regurgitation of the information Bob Fitrakis provided during the 1990s, and or just things that have been around in the public sphere for a very long time and sort of repackaged and given to the public as if it were the definitive Epstein story. Well, what that has done is a lot of harm to all of us, because it basically has made you look at, it's a psyop, right? It's sort of like, look at this. And while you're so busy going into these different rabbit holes that basically lead nowhere, you're ignoring the bigger aspect and not focusing on other people whose names have not even been connected to, quote, the Epstein story. We're going to just use the Epstein story, although, I go back several generations in piecing together the Epstein story. In fact, with Wexner, I go back into his grandparents and I bring it to present day. This past weekend, I included information on Abigail, his wife, and the fact that even mainstream media's story about how they met is a lie put forward by Wexner's public relations agency, Hill and Knowlton, who are basically known to have been and continue to be agents of what I'm going to call our shadow government or our collective intelligence agencies. So as an example, Hill and Knowlton is known for a lot of duplicitous stuff. Among these is the story of Nayirah, the young Kuwaiti girl who sparked international headlines for her shocking testimony before the Congressional Human Rights Caucus in October of 1990. And like trying to contain her tears, she basically told the horrors that she witnessed being committed by Iraqi soldiers at a Kuwaiti hospital where she was theoretically volunteering, right? So basically, this is what she said. I volunteered at the Aladdin Hospital with 12 other women who wanted to help as well. I was the youngest volunteer. The other women were from 20 to 30 years old. While I was there, I saw Iraqi soldiers come onto the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators. And then she repeated it, out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor. So here's what happened. The story was told by then President George H.W. Bush, not one time, not two times, sorry, but 6 separate times. It was And here it would repeat it. Oh, they had kids in incubators, they were thrown out, blah, blah, blah. And then when the Gulf War resolution was making its way through the House, the story was once again raised in Congress. And so at that time, Representative Henry Hyde said, now is the time to check the aggression of this ruthless dictator whose troops have bayoneted pregnant women and have ripped babies from the incubators. So here's eventually what happened. It was discovered that Nayirah, she wasn't just some anonymous, obscure Kuwaiti girl, but she was the daughter of Saud al-Sabah, the Kuwaiti ambassador to the United States. And her testimony, by the way, was written for her by Helen Knowlton. Helen Knowlton. There's more, okay? The caucus that held the hearing where Nayirah gave her testimony, that was a Helen Knowlton front. So that was an intelligence front. That is who presented to the world that Abigail Koppel, the daughter of Yehuda Koppel, who started an agency in New York for LL in 1950. That is who made the initial story, the front story, if you will, of how Leslie Wexner and Abigail Koppel met. That she well, I'm going to say the word theoretically because it didn't happen that way. That she met Wexner being introduced by the wife, now deceased, of one of his closest friends. Well, that didn't happen that way. And that didn't happen that way because anyone going into, let's say, becoming not just Wexner's, let's call it BEARD, but to become his wife would have had to be someone who was accustomed to, let's call it deception tactics, right? So who better than the daughter of a spy? However, there's a lot more, while these pop-up pundits, and I'm really upset because among the things that I discovered is that there are more people, for example, who have never been connected to Epstein, who were aware of what happened in 2001 during the month of September. And I'm saying it like this for a reason, all right? Because you have to be somewhat alert to how the platform responds to certain information. So a high-level official appears to have had pre-knowledge of this, which led to over 300 firefighters to basically lose their life almost immediately on that day, which then what did that do? That then increased the numbers of casualties, normal people, including one of my friends. And so that, yes, it's funny because I tweeted something earlier and somebody said, well, yeah, there are layers. Yeah, there are layers. This is true. There are layers. But if you're busy looking at this and you don't look at this and you never find out about X, Y, and Z, and really, again, only low-lying fruit has been presented to the public. Mainstream doesn't even do low-lying fruit. Mainstream just regurgitates like what a public relations firm like Helen Knowlton has given them permission to print, right? So I just want to say that there's only so much I can say on any platform. You know that, well, many of you may be aware that in November of 2022, my platform on Twitter just disappeared. And so what I had begun to do when I started working on this, and I'll tell you why I started to work on this. Many of you know that I am a survivor of this network. By the way, I am the only survivor who is also an author, who continues to investigate the tentacles. I'm going to call it tentacles to use a word by kind of connected to Danny Casolaro, who continues to report and investigate this very broad and deep story where not even a tenth of the people who are legitimately involved and who have been legitimately involved for a very long time have been even mentioned. Which brings us to the fact that what you have heard from the victims themselves has been, has been diminished into what the attorneys that are in charge, which includes David Boies, wants the public to know. So just as an example, and I'm not going to go deep into this right here, Boies was also the attorney, not just for Harvey Weinstein, and that's a played out card, but also for Bill and Hillary Clinton, which is not a played out card. All right. However, there are many people connected to Donald Trump. This is a bipartisan problem. I'm sorry to break your heart. This is a bipartisan problem. It's again, a multi-generational problem. However, I am personally upset because as a victim survivor of this network who began working on it thinking that I was protecting myself, and I began working on this long before Epstein was ever arrested, because I've had 3 attempts on my life, 3 attempts that I'm aware of. I was kidnapped the first time, I was shot at the second time. That there have been things that have happened to me to make me believe someone is actively trying to kill me. And so initially I began doing this thinking I had one person, my ex-abuser, to worry about. And then as the years went by and the things became crazier that happened to me, like people planted in my life, just as was described to have happened to Rose McGowan. Then I started to wonder, well, maybe there are more people involved, right? And then when Epstein was finally arrested in 2019, that's when I just jumped into this, because I knew that whatever the answer was to my own large areas of information that I needed answers to, that had permeated every aspect of my life. So I jumped in and I began to share what I knew. And I realized when I began to do that there was a lot of pushback. And a lot of it came from these pop-up pundits. And I initially was a little surprised, because I'm thinking to myself, well, aren't we all on the same side? And the answer is no, we're not. Just as mainstream media has a stranglehold on what most people who rely on mainstream, although that number is less and less, the so-called indie media appear to have their own agenda. And that means, again, giving you low-lying fruits of information. Low-lying fruit means nothing, because it, again, excludes a large number of people who have never really been discussed, and which would give you a better perspective of what we have been up against, because in my own journey, I went from, oh, I'm trying to keep myself safe from one person, and then I realized that there had been this artillery force, as if I was battling an army, like an army, a very thick old wall, you know, put up like to battle armies, like during the 15th century. And I couldn't figure out where that wall came from, who was part of that wall. Well, as a result of my work, I realized what that wall consists of. And it's been information that I have been sharing on my, initially in my Epstein project, which I then kind of moved over onto my Substack. And again, there's only a limited amount of things that I can say on this platform or on Twitter. So I invite you to read the latest installment, which is part 15 of Wexner. However, to read everything on there. I have over 200 deep dives. And so far, while I have seen pushback, I have been able to share most of what I have discovered, again, with receipts. All right, guys, I want to ask you to please give this a like, and hopefully I'll see you guys on my Substack. Have a good day. Bye.